We'll go ahead and dive right in. First thing I want to kind of give is for those of you who may not know the political, social, and economic situation in Venezuela, love to kind of paint a quick picture for that, get you all up to speed on the kind of challenges the country is facing. So I'm going to turn that over to Randy and Diana.
Well, the current situation in Venezuela is that there's a lot of frictions in all the kind of payments, and this is caused by the number of restrictions, censorship that is imposed on payments, both from outside the country but also inside the country on the payment methods that still exist there, since the 2003 imposed monetary controls on capital control and foreign exchange. So people have been forced for the last 15 years to use their local currency only in all trades. So this adds a lot of frictions because of the inflation on the currency in the country, and it adds a lot of difficulties on people who wants to trade or do commerce.
Absolutely, and Diana, adding on to that, how bad is the hyperinflation that we're seeing, and how bad are the government's controls over people's bank accounts and the flow of money into and out of the country?
Well, something that the international public need to understand about Venezuela and the economic crisis we're going through is, well, first of all, if you look in any site about the hyperinflation in Venezuela, you're going to be amazed, mostly because you cannot simply understand how it's possible that we're reaching the million already on hyperinflation percentage. So it's bad. And when you're living in hyperinflation, it simply means that your money is worth nothing, that even when you have resources available in the country, it's something that flows. It comes and goes. Sometimes you have the money, but you don't have anything to buy because there's nothing on the supermarket. And what's happening right now is that there are importing new products into the supermarkets, but with what money do you buy it? So we're kind of in a stabilized in that concept. And the controls are a whole other subject. When we talk about the controls that the government of Venezuela are applying on its people, they have various ways. They are very genius on that. So when you are living overseas, they have already told the banks to block the IP addresses that are coming from outside Venezuela, so they cannot use their accounts. If you are outside of Venezuela, you cannot use your account. So that affects any number of people who had to flee the country and cannot get, for example, their wages. The people who are no longer working, whatever the government is giving them in return, they cannot get it because it's all going to their national accounts. So yeah, they're blocking the accounts right now.
And so, Jamaal, with the kind of research you've been doing at Open Money Initiative, looking at, for those of you who don't know, Venezuelan citizens have been leaving the country in droves. Correct me if I'm wrong on this figure, it's something like in the past few years, 1 million or so have been scattered around neighboring countries and states in Latin America. So Jamaal, with the refugee community outside of Venezuela, what kind of impact have those IP policing kind of statutes, what kind of impact has that had on how people bank outside of the country and also try to help their families and their friends inside the country?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. As far as I know, it's actually about 5 billion people that have left.
Oh, wow, yeah, so that was low
quite a few. So we spent a lot of time in Colombia, between the capital city and on the border of Venezuela, and we met with a lot of refugees. And the challenge with leaving Venezuela is you're often leaving for work because your salary doesn't keep up with inflation in Venezuela, and you want to transfer money home or send goods or sort of connect your family with things they can't get in Venezuela. And there literally is no way to send money to Venezuela, like no legal way to send money to Venezuela. I mean, there's not even a Western Union. So often what people are doing are either using a hawala system, which is highly illegal pretty much in the entire Western world, which basically means you find someone who happens to have an account, say if you're in Colombia, who happens to have a bank account in Colombia and Venezuela. You give them Colombian money, they put that in their Colombian bank account, they log into their Venezuelan account, or they message their sibling who is still in Venezuela and has an account and ask them to transfer money from their Venezuelan account to the end party's account. Another way is, of course, is Bitcoin. So people use local Bitcoins pretty actively in Venezuela. It's not at any huge scale by any means, but that is one way that people get money into and out of the country.
Yeah, and so I want to hit on that next. And Randy, when we were backstage, you were kind of talking about the difference between Bitcoin as a remittance option, which is what we often, or some people will often call it in the industry, and what you said is more of a payment gateway. I think, Jamaal, you basically described it as piping, like a financial pipeline between two financial silos outside of the country and inside of the country. So, in what ways is Bitcoin being used as a way to get money into the country?
Yeah, well, the people outside the country that are earning enough money to make saving, so they can convert that into Bitcoin. So they are using those Bitcoins, like they are purchasing it and using it immediately to send it to Venezuela, or using it as a store of value, so they can send regularly some funds to Venezuela, because converting all of it into local currency is a really bad idea because of the hyperinflation. So they keep it in Bitcoin, or they keep it in virtual US dollars, like Tether, or through US dollar, or DAI, and then they use that more stable currency, that the Bitcoin is more stable than the local currency itself. So they use it as a way to convert regularly for their expenses, or the expenses, or their family's expenses there, so they don't have to go put money in their family's bank accounts only when they need it. So only when they have to pay the rent, or only when they have to pay for the electricity or water, they convert that through local Bitcoins, or through the remittances, like irregular remittances offices, which is basically what Jamaal said, is one person with an WhatsApp account or Telegram account that you tell him, I have this Bitcoin, or I have this DAI, I need bolivars in this bank account, and I need it now. And this is how Bitcoin is enabling people in Venezuela to hold their earned money in a more stable currency, which is the bolivar, or the Bitcoin, or the US dollar in virtual form, and they are using that as a bridge to jump the controls on the foreign exchange control, where they cannot directly go to a bank in the US and say, well, I want to pay my father's house expenses from the US. You cannot do that because the country was completely separated from the international exchange, foreign exchange systems since the 2003. So people, what they do is use these bridges between the systems, so they can circumvent these controls.
Word, yeah. So it's great for getting money into the country, and like you were saying, once it's in there, people will liquidate it on a case-by-case basis through local Bitcoins. We were talking about this backstage. It's a very liquid currency in the country because of the demand, and some people, like you said, will hold it. But Diana, you wrote a great article on CoinDesk about legitimate expectations for how Bitcoin can be used in the country. What are some of the myths that you see for its use case? Like the idea that merchants are taking it maybe, or the idea that everyone in Venezuela has a Bitcoin account?
No, we're not using Bitcoin commonly in Venezuela, even though it's an alternative, a quite usable one, because it's an excellent way for remittances, for example, and to get actual resources into the country by buying them overseas, and then sending them, shipping them. The actual way Venezuelans are using cryptocurrency right now is mostly by mining and also by trading, okay? So what normal people do, what I did personally while I was working, I was paid in Bitcoins, and I helped my family. That way I still do. So basically, you just look to pay for the most basic stuff. I obviously don't go to Amazon and try to buy something with my Bitcoins to get food into my house. So what I will do, and what many people that I know do, is just to go to local Bitcoins, get just the right amount for you to eat that day, is what we do. It's just to turn funds into something you can use inside of the country. That, of course, has let's say it has speed up a little and changed the dynamic, because now from December, if I still stand corrected, from December last year, now people are able, or businesses can accept other coin or other currencies besides bolívares. Now there was, I don't know if you guys heard, back in March, not so far ago, the country went through an electricity crisis. And that's when the whole cryptocurrency thing, I think that it snapped a little bit. Because since you don't have any form to pay, because the cash is not worth anything, because like we said, hyperinflation. And then you don't have any other form of digital payment. So we had to get really handy on that, you know. So the cryptocurrency would help up to a certain point, but let me ask you this, guys in the audience, if maybe you can riddle me this. If you don't have a way to charge your phone, how do you use your crypto wallet? If you don't have electricity to turn on your computer where your wallet is, how do you get the funds in the first place? How do you make any transactions? So in Venezuela, there was a program, a project from Dash Text, who tried to actually help people. Another project that is in the development is right here. We're going to talk about it later. But basically, you have to roll up your sleeve on this, because it's not as simple as it seems, because when you have electricity all the time and internet all the time, it's very easy to just oversee the actual situation.
Right, there are more infrastructural difficulties and hurdles that we have to clear.
Of course.
And in your research, Jamaal, what are some more of those kind of obstacles that you see that are not just on the level of, you can't just give people Bitcoin. There are so many hurdles that need to be cleared with just in the fabric of the society itself.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing to me is when you design something, say you design a product that's going to use Bitcoin, it has to instill confidence in whoever's going to use it. And there's still a lot of trust and confidence issues in this new entity, Bitcoin. I mean, we had people, refugees and people in Venezuela sort of rank assets of what would you prefer to save in from most to least. And it was always US dollars first, obviously, for many reasons. And Bitcoin was close to the top, but it was often viewed as something that was a great opportunity a while ago. So it was sort of seen as a speculative asset, sometimes talked about in the same vein as the petro, or sometimes talked about in the context of mafia. So there's a lot of questions about it. And not only the confidence thing, where that's a human element that you have to design for, that is a big obstacle. There's also the challenge of making it resilient, where Venezuelans are sort of living between modern and archaic states. They're constantly switching back and forth between having electricity, having internet, and not, right? And so how do you use a wallet when you don't have those things? And then furthermore, I would say, if you think about, so my profession is, I'm a product designer, and often when you design something, say you're onboarding someone into Bitcoin, right? From being siloed and stuck in your domestic dying currency, the bolivar. It's like you also need to make sure that that's a safe asset, and you're also not siloed in that new asset. And part of the challenge with Bitcoin is, I think, what would make it so much easier to onboard people is if it was very quick to get tangible. And what I mean by that is, like, if I have Bitcoin in Venezuela, I have to go to local Bitcoins and exchange it, get money in my account. But if I could make that seamless and quick, so that people who are new to Bitcoin, don't want to understand a blockchain and mining and all that stuff, they can see that they can go from Bitcoin to real very quickly. And I think that's part of the challenge I see a lot of people approaching the field with, is that they're not thinking about how do we make it tangible very quickly and very trustworthy
Right.
to build that confidence.
Right, and this is something that I think, Randy, for instance, your charity, Bitcoin Venezuela, by the way, y'all, if you've never checked out Bitcoin Venezuela, highly recommend it. They do great work in the country, and they survive off of donations from people like y'all. And one of the things that they do very well is providing those tangible, what Jamaal was talking about, those tangible things that people can really, look at and say, okay, this is the benefit of this. Like for instance, when they send Bitcoin into the people in the country that are working with them, they will then transfer that into things like food. They'll get medical supplies and healthcare supplies for the people in the country. But one thing I also want to return back to that Jamaal and Diana hit on is what happens when you don't have internet? What happens when the electricity goes out? What happens when the government decides to turn off, people's access to electricity? So in the short time that we have left, Randy, I would like for you to talk very briefly about what local Bitcoin is doing to, accelerate mesh network adoption.
Well, Bitcoin is a really bad form to pay others, except for the other ways to pay. So it's like, if you are in Venezuela and you say like, oh, Bitcoin is volatile, it's difficult to use, it needs a smartphone, you need internet, you need electricity, so it's very difficult to use, people don't understand it. But then you look at all the other options, and you don't even have it. So you don't have Venmo, you don't have PayPal, you don't have dollars, you don't have bolivars in cash, which if there is no electricity, you could pay with cash, but cash in Venezuela is so scarce that you cannot really use it because there is no enough bills to give you the cash back or the change. So you end up with like $100. You have it $100 in a bill, and you have to pay someone. You are not allowed. You cannot basically use it to pay others because they cannot give you your change because they don't have local currency. And they don't have dollars. So what you do when you don't have any way to pay? What happened with commerce? How do you tell others that you are going to sell the products that they are bringing from the coast into the center of the city? So for that you use the regular. It's said that Venezuela runs completely on top of WhatsApp. People chat and they trade and they do all the stuff in WhatsApp. They do transfers and things like that. But what you do when there is no electricity, there is no internet, or the internet is censored, so you are not even allowed to use WhatsApp to chat with others. So in that, Locha Mesh, we are working on mesh network devices that are open source and open hardware that will enable communications and also private Bitcoin transaction. So you are allowed to pay others and communicate with others to continue doing commerce, so you can continue circumventing all the circumstances of your country, like in the case of Venezuela, but also in disasters, like could be a hurricane, like the case of Puerto Rico. So it's really needed is that people need to be able to trade freely, as in freedom, and also privately. So even if the government tries to stop them, or if the infrastructure has collapsed completely, you can continue doing payments and communicating with your relative and your loved ones, even if there is no electricity or internet at all. And Bitcoin and the Lightning Network are going to enable this for Venezuela and for every other country that need it.
Great, awesome. Thank you very much for all the great responses, guys. Really appreciate it, and thank you all for joining us.
Wish we had more time.